Good evening and welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast, the podcast where we cover matters of local, national, and even international political importance, but in a calm, measured, and reasonable way to get to the heart of the matter. I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sansbury. And we had a different show planned for this Sunday, but we changed it because there was an announcement in the middle of the week. So we're absolutely delighted to be able to welcome on two guests that are impacted directly by that and can speak to that with authenticity and authority. And they are Martin Todd.
Hello.
And Anna Cllr.
Hello.
So welcome both to the show. We're talking about devolution and about the delay that was announced on Thursday to the mayoral elections. So before we get right into our questions, I think probably our viewers might benefit from a brief explainer of devolution, what it means, what the plan is, if anyone actually knows anymore, and how that's meant to work. And hopefully, when I've done that, our guests won't tell me that actually half of that is wrong. So devolution is was announced by the Labour government last December, and it announced its devolution plans being the biggest change to local and regional government in over 50 years, calling for submissions from councils by January the 10th and offering the opportunity for a fast-track devolution. Other regions in the UK with elected mayors have broader powers to affect policy and planning, as well as longer-term financial settlements to help them achieve those goals. And Hampshire and the Solent is the name given to the Mayoral Combined Authority, or MCCCA, made up of the County of Hampshire plus the Isle of Wight plus the unitary authorities of Southampton and Portsmouth. And the elected mayor for Hampshire and the Solent would be responsible for over 2 million residents and lead the Hampshire and the Solent Mayoral County Combined Authority. I'm not going to keep saying that. It's just going to trip me over. With powers over transport, local infrastructure, skills and employment support, housing, strategic planning, economic development, environment, health and well-being, and public safety. With the elections planned for the inaugural mayor to take place in May 2026. And essentially, this kind of replaces the level that is the county council. Alongside the devolution for the creation of the MCCA and the mayoral, the elected mayor itself. There's also a conversation about dividing up that combined area into larger local authority, larger unitary authorities. There are 4 different submissions as to how to do that, and whether that's splitting the region into 5. There are 3 options to split it into 5, and there's another option to actually split it into 4. If you want to go and view these in detail, scan the QR code in the top right-hand corner. The links to them all are actually on our website. So those proposals vary. I won't go into them into detail because we're talking about the devolution rather than the LGR that talks about that. But essentially, those those unitary authorities need to have at least 500,000 residents, with a special case being submitted to exempt the Isle of Wight for that, because of its geographical and economical isolation from the rest of the region. So that was all of that plan. And then on Thursday, the government announced that they were going to delay the mayoral elections until 2028.
Well, I think that sounds like a fair summary. We'll get into the meat of the questions, but if we can just start by asking you to introduce yourselves, kind of how you got into politics and where you were until earlier this week in terms of the mayoral elections. Can I ask that to Anna first, please?
Yeah, hi, thank you. So my own journey into politics has been it's been kind of quite recent, really. So a couple of years ago, I was really struggling with climate anxiety and finding myself kind of overwhelmed by a feeling of powerlessness. And at that moment, I kind of knew I had to do something a little bit different. And so really thought about what my particular skill set is, what my responsibilities are, and what I really love And those questions prompted me to take the first step into standing for the Green Party. So I stood in the election last year, the general election for New Forest West, and had an interesting, really interesting time with learning more about the political kind of structures in the country, and also about what I really enjoyed about politics, and I did really enjoy the husting events and all of that kind of that real cut and thrust of the actual debates that we had. So yeah, that was kind of where it went for me. Obviously, I didn't get elected. That wasn't really on the cards. But when the mayoral election kind of was announced earlier this year, I was approached by members of my party who suggested that perhaps I would be willing to stand as the mayoral candidate, and so I was selected. I was delighted about that. It's a real honour and a privilege to be selected by the regional parties for this position, and yeah, we were going full guns blazing, really. So it was a little bit of a shock, to be honest, that it was cancelled, or rather postponed. That it was postponed. So yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Anna. And Martin, can I ask the same question to yourself, please?
Yeah, I mean, I've been involved and interested in politics for really since I was at university, which to date me back was at a time when Margaret Thatcher was the Prime Minister. I deeply disliked the damage that I could see her doing to the social fabric of the country. But at the time, I thought Labour was beyond the pale. I was inspired by the then Liberal Party and joined and became active, and broadly have stayed with them ever since. I was very heavily involved around the time the party was deciding that it was going to oppose the Iraq War. One of my odder experiences was acting as a banner carrier for Charles Kennedy on the Iraq War March, where I had to protect him from embarrassing photographs by standing strategically with my banner next to him. I was involved in the campaign against Brexit. And during that time, I ran for Parliament a few times. I ran in 2001, 2005, 2010, and 2017. And my interest had primarily been national. I then got involved on a local level. I became a city councillor, a district councillor in Winchester in 2012, and a county councillor in 2013. To start with, in both cases in opposition, doing what I could to get change from that position. So I managed to, for example, get the county council to declare a climate emergency despite being in opposition. Then we did a lot of work in the run-up to 2019 thinking about what our vision was for the Winchester district, and so we then won and took control in 2019, and then I was a cabinet member. I was doing a lot to transform our recycling. I was cabinet member during the pandemic, and then became leader in 2022 of Winchester City Council. And as soon as the idea of devolution came on the table, I was quite keen that we went ahead with it. I could see how we were missing that kind of strategic level for particularly actually transport, but in other areas as well. And so I was supportive of that initiative moving forward, and also thinking about what that meant for us politically. And then we then moved to having a selection earlier in the year. It was a contested selection, and I ended up as the candidate. So obviously a huge amount of organisational work. There's 2 million people, 1.6 million letterboxes to about 1.5 million. So a lot of work underway to make sure that we were match fit for what was going to be a big election. And then had an inkling that something was up, I think the previous Friday, actually, where I'd been told, have a look at the budget. There's nothing in there. And then I heard, I think on the Wednesday night, about an hour before the Sun broke the story, that it was all cancelled. And then I have to say, just this sort of sense of, to be honest, I wasn't actually thinking about what the implication was for the campaign, or even to a degree for myself. The full horror of a longer campaign came later. I think it was more, this is such a mess. This was actually one of the things could be a good thing that people seem to be behind. There was broad political consensus. We could be making a difference, no matter who won. We could be doing more for our region. And clearly, what had clearly been some kind of argument within government of the balance between local government reorganisation and devolution had sort of finally shifted in favour of local government reorganisation, which I think is a huge mistake. I think they've got it the wrong way around. I think Labour is making a big error here, but that's, it's too late.
That's for questions further down the list. Thank you, Martin. Simon.
Okay, so how does this delay impact on the region's councils and residents? Anna, can I come to you first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think to be really honest, I'm not convinced that the majority of the residents of Hampshire and the Isle of Wight actually know that there's a major devolution of power that's kind of on the cards anyway. I mean, in terms of most ordinary people who I've spoken to, kind of beyond, leaders in business, leaders in local government and so on, have all been, kind of quite surprised when they've learned that we're going to be electing a mayor, not next year now, but down the line. So I guess, there's, a major impact on residents will be, it actually gives us all time to actually get that message across of the change that is coming, and to help people to kind of to feel empowered in that shift to a stronger regional politics. I can't really speak for councils, and I'm sure Martin will. But I guess the delay gives them time to kind of set out clear boundaries for those new unitaries, which haven't been finalised yet, and make sure that transition is kind of managed in a sensible way. But I mean, it also gives councils time to set their own agenda for what devolution and mayoral priorities should be, and I think that also potentially means that the mayor won't be as free to bring in an independent and clear strategic vision, and that's potentially a bit of a problem. That the mayor was really a kind of once in a generation opportunity to not do politics as usual, and this delay means that we won't get that opportunity for change for another couple of years.
Fantastic, thank you, Martin. What's your observation and how it's impacting councils? The announcement.
I mean, I absolutely agree with Anna's point about people not knowing what the mayor was, what the powers were. They probably learned more about it, frankly, in the last 4 days than had ever happened before. I've been out knocking on doors in Basingstoke and Gosport this week, after the announcement, and I can tell you that absolutely nobody mentioned it to me at all. In terms of practical impacts, the two practical impacts that will make a difference to our region that would have impacted residents. The first is we will have £60 million less to spend next financial year and the year after in combination as a result. It's about £30 million a year less that could be spent on infrastructure and improvements to our region. And then the second is that certain powers will stay in Whitehall that could have moved down to Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. So we will not, as I understand it, we will have what's called a foundation strategic authority rather than a mayoral strategic authority. And some of the things that I think would be useful to be happening, particularly to do with the rail network and the careers, 16 to 19 education, innovation funding, will be kind of out of scope because it's a foundation strategic authority and not a mayoral one. So that's a kind of pragmatic thing. The thing that is quite important for councils is that because the foundation strategic authority is effectively not going to have a mayor at the table, and I'm assuming it will have the planned arrangements of like 2 votes from Hampshire, 1 each from Portsmouth, Southampton, and the Isle of Wight, is it matters even more than it did before who is running those councils. So this year's local elections, i.e. the ones coming up next May, which are meant to happen almost everywhere. So at the county, most districts, though not all, and all the unitaries are really important because, as Anna says, the agenda for what the strategic authority is going to be set by the people chosen in this year's local government elections. And they will have a bigger role and do more to shape what the future of the mayoral authority looks like than would have otherwise been the case. And again, like Anna, I worry that I think we're missing the chance to possibly get the scale of change that's needed. Because whoever the mayor is will be presented by a fait accompli. That was always going to be part of the dynamic. And so, I mean, we'll talk about delay in a minute, but one of the politics of the first 2 years were going to be difficult because of the construction of the combined authority isn't that well designed. But arguably, it's going to be even worse now as a result of this change.
I guess to that end then, Martin, obviously we've been following this with interest, and the original timeline looked very rushed. Has the government been right to delay the process to give it time to get it right, or is it a case of there's something else in play here?
I think there's 2 elements to that. And first of all, I don't think there is a right time. Okay, so I'll come back to why I think that is. I think the difference is that if they had gone ahead with a mayor in May, the councils that are establishing the combined authority at the moment have a plan that was effectively quite minimalist. They were essentially designing something that the mayor could come into and then shape. And so that the authority would be established very much reflecting the mandate of the mayor in the first 2 years. And the way they're handling the funding and the fact that there's this like 1 million a year, 1 million this year, and then 1 million for each of the next 2 years or 3 years. And then there's going to be a sort of 20 million, how much is it? Yeah, about I can't remember, 17 million fund or whatever it is for the 2 years means that in practice, the combined authority will have to be much more set up and will be much more established and will have a set of policy plans and may, for example, have already agreed a spatial development strategy or a growth plan or the other things that the combined authority is meant to be doing. The idea that at the time that the mayor comes into power, local government reorganisation is done is a fantasy. Okay, local authorities have been given very long to-do lists by government to prepare in time for the announcement in March, and then the standing up of when we find out what the configuration is, and then move to local government reorganisation. But if you talk to people who've been through it, the idea that the first 2 or 3 or 5 years are not going to be extraordinarily challenging for the new authorities is a complete fantasy. So yes, they all start on the same time. And there is some logic to that because the governance was going to be very confusing for the first 2 years. But the idea that there's suddenly going to be loads of time for the new authorities to be able to put into the combined authority is is odd, and we're going to be in this weird situation where four authorities that no longer exist have shaped the combined authority. They exit the field, and then a new set of authorities come in place. But there's no right time. I'm not wholly convinced by this idea that there's a delay. I understand there is some logic because it was really confusing, the whole process, but they could have done it. The authorities here were ready to do it. Everybody was working to be ready in time for a May election.
Thank you, Martin. Anna, I'd like to bring you in. Your perspective. Right, better to leave it later and get it right, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's really tricky. I mean, I can hear lots of what Martin was saying there. It seems like it definitely makes sense. But I think the problem is that if the Labour government knew their timeline for devolution was unrealistic, then quite frankly they should have thought through that timeline with much more clarity earlier on. I think it's interesting, because the government was so excited and keen to push through that devolution agenda, weren't they? I mean, and Angela Rayner was really such a driving force behind it all, and her departure from that role is perhaps part of the reason why it's kind of gone off the rails. Now, I mean, it feels to me that the original devolution agenda was really intended to capitalise on the Labour landslide and aimed at getting Labour mayors elected in all these kind of vitally important regional roles. And as we know, Labour are really struggling in the polls at the minute. They're deeply unpopular, and so it really looks as though the decision comes from a position of Labour instability. There's a lot of chaos, there's a lot of U-turns in the heart of government at the minute, and of course clear growing threats as well. We've got Reform on the far right, and the Greens as well, offering a real, really proper vision of a socially fair society that people, and young people especially, really can't get enough of. And of course, that's not what Labour are actually saying. The lack of preparation and organisation of what regional devolution actually looks like is clearly a problem too, as Martin said. But the government set that agenda, and they knew their own timeline. And as Martin said, we've all had to respond to those timelines, to those demands from central government, and we have done, in spades, as we've discussed. So. I do think, of course, it's really important to get democracy right and make sure that when it happens, it doesn't happen in a chaotic way. But it's not a good look, I think, for Labour right now.
I mean, it's interesting that what one hears is that at the first meeting of nations and regions, they presented a draft white paper that only talked about devolution and didn't have local government reorganisation in it. We then had a rumour from the Treasury in their autumn statement or whatever that said, oh, we're going to save money through local government reorganisation, at which point everybody in local government just laughed. Then you have this, so then local government reorganisation gets bigger and bigger and bigger as a project, and they now seem to have just flipped the priorities. And there's an important point here. I mean, local government was asked to do things and to hit certain timings, and it hit every single one, and it was on track to hit the timings. And the only body in all of this that has completely failed to hit its own timings is central government, and they're the ones who can't deliver. It's not local government.
No, it just seems because I don't know any councils up and down the country that have loads of spare resource or loads of spare time and loads of spare money to basically to spend on kind of focusing on a really, really big but ill-defined change that's being done at pace. So then basically moving the yardstick on it is what does the timeline look like now for devolution and LGR, or does anybody know? Because that's an honest question.
I chair the meeting of all the councils. If anybody knows, and every now and again I ask for reports on how's it all going. So I will tell you what I understand, which I think, and I get letters from ministers and things about all of this. So I'll tell you what I understand it to be. So local government reorganisation, the next thing that's going to happen is that we will be told what the new council. Well, the consultation closes, I think, in early
I think the 11th of January, isn't it?
11th of January. Then in March, we get the decision, we get told what the configurations are. I'll do it in linear time just to show how muddled it all is. In April the 1st, the new
How appropriate.
combined authority, the foundation combined authority it comes into existence as a formal body. Okay.
Right.
In May, we supposedly have county, unitary, and district elections, which will decide who's sitting on that combined authority. One date that doesn't get talked about, but in local government is a very, very big deal, is around the time that the structural change order for local government comes in, the shutters come down on a lot of discretionary spending in local government. So at that point, you need permission either from a commissioner or from a shadow authority. And this is autumn 26, September, October 26, to spend more than £100,000. And that can be £100,000 as the entire contract value over the length of the contract, any capital sum, and any revenue sum. Okay, so they're trying to avoid what is known as what I call the leisure centre problem, which is after local government reorganisation was announced in about 72, 73, you then had the biggest boom in leisure centre building in British history before the councils were abolished in 1974. So all leisure centres date from that period, or a huge proportion date from that period between the announcement of local government reorganisation and the implementation. So there are now heavy financial controls to stop you doing that. But it does mean that in the worst case, in autumn, all the existing local authorities effectively become zombie authorities in terms of what they're able to do. So they will continue to collect the bins and work on things that are already in the budget, but they lose a lot of discretion from that point onwards. So that's autumn 26. May 27, you then have the shadow elections to the new authorities. So what you do there is you elect the people who are going to run the councils for 4 years. And for the first year, what they are doing is, as we now know, approving spending in the old authorities, setting the budget, setting the council tax, writing the constitution of the new councils that come into existence. In April 2028, those new authorities come into existence and the old authorities cease to exist. So at that point, whatever the 5 or 6 new councils are, the 4 or 5 new councils come into existence, and all the people who are on the shadow authority become the councillors of that new authority. And then in May 2028, mayoral elections and the mayoral combined authority comes into existence. So that's my understanding of the timetable. But as we know, the government may change it.
That's this week.
At any point, at very short notice.
Well, okay. Well, thank you for taking us through that. It needs a diagram, and it looks like it needs a lot of dry erase board. And not then. No, we're going to.
The dullest few moments of the entire history of this podcast. So I apologise.
Yep. Honestly, you're nowhere near. Honestly. I kind of lost my place. So that was the kind of the timeline. So was there anything you wanted to add in on that, Anna, about any kind of thoughts on the timeline?
I think Martin's covered it all. I think Martin's got the detail. He's got the detail down.
Yeah.
So that's even more complicated. And the zombie authorities is a new one on me as well. I hadn't really understood that was also going to be part of the picture. It's it's worrying.
Yeah, it's for an exercise that's meant to be about improving local democracy and local accountability. Mm-hmm. It seems to have several bits that don't. Or in the execution of it, or the institutional instigating of it, don't kind of seem to do that. Ian, what was the next one?
So we're talking about democracy itself, and a lot of our excitable online chums are basically saying that this is an absolute affront to democracy, and I think you touched on it earlier, Anna, that this is just Labour. They know they're going to get hammered. They're just kicking this into the long grass. Is it an affront to democracy, Anna?
Well, it's I think it's not just online commentators. I think every single party apart from Labour is describing this decision as democracy being denied. And I mean, it kind of is true. I mean, I think it is. I don't think it's at all fair to announce these, extremely important new mayoral authorities and then push back that deadline. Parties have invested time and money and energy into these campaigns, and it really smacks of Labour using their power to stop or manipulate democracy, perhaps to deny people now the right to put someone in place as mayor. And the green surge is clearly part of that picture. One look at the polls will show you that the Greens are more popular than Labour or the Tories and the Lib Dems as well. Sorry, Martin. And 40% of 18 to 24-year-olds say that they would vote Green, and that's a really historic achievement for our party and for Zach's bold leadership that has been really instrumental in delivering that, exposing Labour cruelty, the capitulation to the far right and that kind of thing. So by controlling the timing of this election, Labour have kind of actively denied giving people their chance to give their opinion on the current government. So, the last thing Labour wants is to have, a set of incredibly powerful regional politicians who aren't dancing to their tune. So, if we start to look at it in that light, then yeah, it does start to feel like an affront to democracy.
Martin, your perspective.
Well, first of all, just sort of kind of for the record, most polls show the Liberal Democrats ahead of the Green Party, but what is definitely the case is that Labour is being hit very hard, is in free fall, and is losing some of the people who voted for them last May for change. This is what I've heard from people on the doorstep. So they are really angry about what they feel is a sense of continuation of where we've been before, and there isn't change. And they are definitely turning to other parties, and they are turning to the Green Party, they're turning to Reform, and they're turning to the Liberal Democrats. And I think Labour might have had a slightly better defence if they hadn't got form on this. So, it's one thing to delay a mayoral election by 2 years, but they are doing it, from our perspective here in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, a year after they delayed the county elections by a year. And for understandable reasons, people aren't necessarily believing them when they say that they're still going to go ahead. So it does feel like sophistry to try and justify running away from an election. To a certain extent, this has always been one of the most amazing things about their drift into local government reorganisation and devolution, is that it seemed very early on that they hadn't actually thought through the political angles of what they were getting into. That was particularly true for local government reorganisation, where clearly they just hadn't done the maths in terms of thinking how it was going to affect them as a party. So I do think they are, that the idea that it wasn't part of their calculation is nonsensical. If they were really serious about it, they could have gone ahead and it would have happened. And it comes in a context of them having form. They've already delayed elections once. That's not something that had happened for a very, very long time. I think it only happened because of COVID. And then I don't remember it in my lifetime that elections got delayed in that kind of way. So they've done it once already. They've done it again. And it's a very casual approach to democracy. It should be a huge deal to cancel an election or delay an election. It's not trivial. It's not minor. And that's not, that's not the sense that I've had from the Labour Party. And I find that really appalling, I have to say.
Simon.
Thank you. So one of the other things that's tied up with this is the police and crime commissioner role. The government have announced that they're going to be getting rid of that by 2028, and the responsibilities that currently sit with the police and crime commissioner are being subsumed under the responsibilities for the for the elected mayor. But one of the announcements from the Home Secretary was that from Shabana Mahmood was that there's a proposal to reduce the number of police forces down from 43 to perhaps as few as 15 or 20. How does that kind of map into how this all kind of works? And do you have any thoughts on that sort of idea? Is it?
I suppose the first thing to say about it is it just feels like it's another example of where they don't have a plan. You know, how can they be having such an unjoined up conversation? And we see this in terms of their growth agenda, where, you know, they take all kinds of anti-growth moves, for example, particularly in immigration, where they're kind of casual about the threats to our universities. Which, again, if you've got any kind of growth agenda, you have to be serious about supporting universities. If you're talking about accountability for the police, you know, and you're saying our big idea is mayors, then and they're going to be responsible for the police as well, then they're casually going, oh yeah, but we'll have 15 or 20 rather than however many mayors we have. It's just an example of, like, there's no coherence to this government. What are they trying to do here? Is it that they have an agenda for devolution and they're going to try and make it work, or what is it? And they seem to have this inability to get all the different departments going in the same direction on a particular policy issue. On this one, quite aside from the kind of political and strategic incoherence of it, I think they're mad. I mean, and the reason I say that is that actually one of the things you learn in local government, and you learn generally, is how joined up these problems are. You know, they've just asked, I mean, another example, they've just asked the NHS to reorganise onto combined authority footprints, okay? And then they've got which is complicated and expensive and is knocking over NHS capacity at the same time. And then they're saying that maybe the police will move to different footprints. And actually there's a real logic. It's one of the things I was most interested in about the mayoral role. There's a real logic to this joined up approach. You know, when you're talking about, for the sake of homelessness or something, and drugs, they're all really closely related. You know, the NHS, the drug services, the housing authorities, the police, they're all dealing in different ways with a particular group of people who have some particular problems that need to be addressed. And actually having structures which enable a joined up approach is a good thing. In that particular case, you know, if you're talking about young people and antisocial behaviour, then having local authorities and the police and the mayor all able to address things in the same way is helpful. And similarly, one thing that's putting huge pressure on the police at the moment is mental health, and they're spending a lot of their time dealing with mental health crisis. And again, you finally got to the point where you have your police on the same footprint as the NHS, as local authorities, and all that we do for public mental health. And then suddenly you say, oh no, we're going to change it again. I just think it's completely mad. And it seems, you know, you have to have some method of holding the police to account. If you're not you could move back to the police authorities type model. But actually having somebody with dedicated time in the context of a mayoral system makes sense to me. But what you miss out if you then suddenly break it all up and take it in different directions is that ability to tackle these problems that stretch across different bits of the public sector. One of the most interesting powers that the mayor has is the power to convene, and the ability to say, you know, everybody in my office now, I mean, it's a slight oversimplification, but you're able to get people together and say, we are going to work collectively on this issue. And then designing your police structures so you go, oh, well, sorry, but we've changed the structure so they're separate. It's crazy.
Thank you. Anna, thoughts on the prospect of an unaligned rationalisation of the police?
Yeah, Yeah, thank you. I mean, this was definitely, an interesting new development. I mean, it sounds to me like a kind of, a classic attempt at kind of, attempting to reduce bureaucracy and increasing efficiency savings and so on. I mean, and I understand that is useful. But I don't know if this is definitely going ahead yet. I think we're waiting for that white paper that will really outline the details of what this move looks like. But yeah, just to echo Martin, I think what we can say is that we really have seen, quite a substantial loss of public trust in policing over the past decades after, various appalling incidents, scandals, and so on. And so, a politically appointed policing crime commissioner, I don't think was ever going to be necessarily a great idea. So I'm really pleased to see, the responsibilities of the PCC coming in under the mayoral authority. And I think, as Martin has just suggested, it really makes sense as it allows that kind of holistic view of the police services in the region, allowing the mayor to introduce proper kind of joined up thinking that takes into account all of the different factors, that might be important. So, thinking about welfare, housing, communities, public safety, and absolutely mental health as well. And you can't look at any of those issues in isolation. And I think that is, as Martin said, getting everyone into his office or her office. That's what the mayor is going to be able to do and really kind of contribute towards. So yeah, I think it's we'll wait and see what that actually looks like, I think.
Perfect. So if we look ahead, the government announced that there would be £44.2 million in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight for the mayor to kind of allocate on what it was spent. Sounds a lot of money, but it's a big county. So could I start with yourself, Anna? What, in terms of where do you think the headlines for that investment? Where would you see that being focused?
Yeah, I mean, it does sound like a lot of money, but I suspect that it would disappear quite fast. I mean, I think starting off, I think a major thing that is really needed is an audit of everything that is transport related in the county, so that we really know what we've got here, where the bottlenecks are, what people actually think about what the problems are with transport, and how we can bring all the different areas of transport together kind of holistically, so that we can make the investments in better public transport where it's really needed. And I know audits are not particularly sexy, but it will really help to support the planning for a better and cleaner regional transport network into the future. So that's kind of really important. But I guess for me, the most important thing to focus on is kind of helping to get the cost of living crisis under control for people. And that's really directly related to people's energy bills. It's a major area that's costing everyone too much money. Our bills are still tied into the global cost of gas. And so one of the biggest things that we can do regionally is to help people out by investing in things like regional and local energy networks, into kind of community energy production, energy efficiency measures. And that ties into things like ensuring there are funds for helping people to invest in insulating their homes, in things like retrofitting, in solar panels, heat pumps, all of those things which will help to free up energy on the national grid, to also then kind of supply more power for some of the big economic projects that the region has got on the cards. And so, I'd also really want to use some of that money in the regeneration of our communities. So thinking about how we can support investment in our high streets, the protection and the enhancement of our public green spaces, space for nature, to support the well-being of people in the region. And of course, alongside that, fostering the development of adult skills. So in lots of areas, but including some of the skills that I've just outlined above that are needed to really support that kind of green transition into a different kind of future. But yeah, I take it's not a lot of money, and that's lot of things on my list.
I was going to say quite a long list, and yeah, no. So Martin,
Yeah,
can I?
but you've got to start somewhere.
No, absolutely, and for most people, politics is about choices in terms of where you choose to spend the money first. So Martin, give you the same opportunity. What are your headlines for where that investment should go?
Yeah, I mean, I would start. I would start with transport. I mean, the entire Mayoral project started in Manchester, which was ultimately about transport, and in particular, I'd be looking for some of those bigger strategic investments and discussions that we haven't been able to have. I mean, I sometimes talk about trains between Southampton and Portsmouth traveling at 32 miles an hour. Well, there's three transport authorities along the way, and we've not been able to have a proper conversation about that. And similarly, ferries are something which exercise people a lot, particularly on the island, but they travel to the mainland. And again, you've got different authorities involved, and that kind of strategic level discussion about that hasn't been properly addressed. So it's quite important that we don't take away local decision making, and where councils have a role in particular forms of transport and design and highways and supporting active travel and other such things, that it is done locally with local involvement. But transport and a strategic view and the funding to drive that change and lead to the improvements in bus services and train services and ferry services is definitely something that needs money spending on it. And some of it may be because some of these projects are very major, is about producing, shall we say, bid grade information that you can go to the Department of Transport and say, here we've got something for you. Here's the deal that we can do in terms of infrastructure, housing, everything that goes together, if you are prepared to spend heavily in our region. It's quite interesting listening to mayors in other places, how they talk about how they also use transport as a tool for regeneration to tackle areas of poverty. They very much have a mindset, which is to say, one of the first uses that you do with your funding is to connect areas of deprivation to areas of growing employment, and make sure that those transport connections are really, really good. And that ties into the area of regeneration. I mean, what I've seen is that regeneration is extremely difficult to do at the moment. Most business cases don't work without external funding. And so use of the mayor's funding, not to pay for the whole thing, but to unlock development and keep moving it ahead, particularly where it's most needed in those centres that need regeneration, will be incredibly important. In terms of green energy, the number of conversations I've had with people today that are saying, I can't grow my business, I can't make this investment, we can't run this lab, because we don't have the power today to do it. It is a real issue, and we're doing a local area energy plan in the Winchester district precisely to try and engage with those issues and talk to SSE about the infrastructure we need. The green energy transition, making sure we have the energy we need in the right places, that it's cheap energy because it's renewable energy, will be incredibly important. There's a real opportunity for our region to be a kind of green energy powerhouse, which is not being taken at the moment. And then one thing that wasn't mentioned that is really important is affordable housing. And again, that is something that sits within the mayor, and it will be about directing funding that we get from Homes England. But again, there's a real, one of the things that is making life unaffordable for people in our region is the cost of housing. And it's, been a big priority for me in Winchester to be building and buying new council houses. And that's something I really want to put a rocket under. And it will be, I think, the first point, and that ties back to Anna's plan, is how do you use the money as a multiplier? Because it won't go very far. But then are there things where you can just unblock things and get them over the line and get them moving? We've now got 2 years to work that out. How lucky are we?
Well, indeed, the gift of time, which I think segues perfectly into Simon's next question.
Okay, so just very, very quickly before I go into that, can I just remind everybody, if you're watching and enjoying and finding this interesting and useful, please do remember to give us a like, a follow, or subscribe wherever you're watching us, whether you're watching on Facebook or on YouTube, just so you can make sure you keep up to date with the other matters that we're discussing. Some of the comments that we've had come in, I'll very, very quickly touch on those because I know we are tight for time. Tim was asking about funding and about actually whether the net benefit of the extra funding or the funding that the government's announcing compared to, is that really actually truly a saving? Are we, the cost of a mayor versus the cost of a Hampshire County Council leader, for example? And Juliet was also querying about the legality of abandoning the May elections, and that not being democratic. So I don't know whether any of us have got any kind of understanding as to that situation. I mean, because it's a new position, I guess it's slightly different than if you were just cancelling outright the elections of existing bodies. Is that the case? That
Yeah, I mean, essentially there is no mayor, so we're not electing somebody who doesn't exist. So I mean, it's not going to be an unelected mayor. It's just not going to be a mayor. That's why I was talking about the absolute importance of having particularly the county elections go ahead. The other authority and the Isle of Wight, county and the Isle of Wight, it's incredibly important that we have elections in May. For those two in particular. The others are elected in thirds, so you can argue that they've got a kind of 2/3 of the mandate.
Yeah.
But the county was elected, I mean, over 4 years ago. It'll be, if it doesn't face election again, it'll be kind of 8 years old by the time the mandate will be 8 years old. So it's incredibly important that those elections happen, and that particularly the island and the Count and Hampshire have a fresh mandate. And frankly, the mandate for Southampton and Portsmouth is up to date, since, as the other question highlighted, as far as we know, and I don't think there's time to rebalance it, the governance will be 2 from Hampshire, 1 each from Portsmouth, Southampton and the Isle of Wight. Whether they'll put any kind of veto provision in there, I don't know, because I suspect Hampshire will be quite nervous about the ability to be outvoted by the unitaries. And actually, there's a point which is, given it's 1.5 million of the 2 million people, New Forest alone, where Anna's a councillor, is bigger in population terms than the Isle of Wight. So is Basingstoke. So there is a real issue with the governance, which was always one of the weaknesses of the situation. On the one hand, I can fully understand the unitaries not wanting to be outvoted by 3/4 of the population. On the other hand, we are 3/4 of the population, for those of us living in the county area.
There's a lot to kind of get into, and there was another comment from YouTube basically talking about the cost of social care, and perhaps it would actually be better if that was brought in house, and rather than actually giving money to private companies. So
the mayor has no role in social care.
So that would stay with the unitary authorities. So that would be a decision for them each individually.
Enormous change in that, because that's probably the bit that people worry most about, which is how is that reconfiguration going to happen and work seamlessly, because we have to do it in a way so that when you get to April the 1st, 2028, and you change from the old authorities to the new authorities, young people in care must notice nothing from one day to the other.
Yeah.
Somebody who's having a carer come in and looking after them, it has to be perfect and
seamless transition.
And nobody knows.
Indeed. So, and thank you for those points. But I mean, elections they're the strangest form of job interview, with an unpredictable interview panel, I guess you could possibly describe the electorate as. How does the delay affect you personally as candidates? Anna, can I come to you first?
Yeah, sure. I like that question. That's nice. I mean, it's tricky. I mean, of course, it's it's super frustrating. The Green campaign was really gathering speed, and I had lots of interesting events, lots of interesting meetings coming up, and so on. And I will still go to those, but we're really enjoying that Green surge at the moment. Green Party members in Hampshire and the Isle of Wight have more than doubled, and that's translating into real energy and real excitement about what a fairer, greener politics looks like. But I guess the delay means that we collectively can really kind of build on all that energy, all that growth, nurture our local parties, build a stronger cross-regional Green Party identity. And in a couple of years' time, there'll be a really kind of positive, hopeful, credible alternative vision for a green future for Hampshire, Solent and the Isle of Wight for people to kind of get behind. But for me personally, I think what the delay means is that, sorry, Martin, I'm actually not a councillor. I just live in the New Forest to get that right. No, that's all right. For me personally, it gives me a bit more space and a bit more time to really get out and meet as many people as possible, meet with local groups, really deeply engage with what the local issues are all over this enormous region, this diverse region. I've been kind of just realizing just how massive Hampshire and the Isle of Wight is as I've kind of going around to all these different places, and that means kind of meeting all sorts of people from business leaders down to the person on the street, and everybody in between. There's a huge opportunity, I think, to build a really exciting kind of campaign over the next couple of years. It is a long time, but I'm here for that long game.
Fantastic. Martin?
I've fought a lot of elections over the years, and I think there's an interesting thing. Well, one is it's very rarely personal. I mean, whatever's going on it might be down to the quality of the campaign and the other things, but it's not about you as a person. And, and the government, I'm fairly certain, hasn't taken this because of anything personal to me either. So, and to be honest, I'd spent, those of us in local government, I apologise, Anna, had kind of got used to the idea that the government would kind of charge in and mess up our lives at will. Because, for example, none of us expected to be spending a huge amount of time on local government reorganisation. I've always looked in any given situation as to how to make the change or how to campaign for the change that I want to make with the institutions, the routes, the opportunities that are available. And inevitably that is going to change in the journey is going to be different. So, we have county elections. I will have a role. I'm a county councillor. I will have a role in organising and thinking about those. We then have the shadow authority elections. There's actually huge organisational questions for political parties to deal with and how we organise ourselves and what we do. So, I'm thinking, right, okay, well, we can't get the change we want through the mayoralty. Well, what are we going to do through councils? How can we get the change that way, or some of it? And how can we get more MPs? And then how can we win the mayoralty? Still very much that as the end objective. I think Anna's point is a really important one about the opportunity for thinking and robust policy formation. There's a bit of me that had already noticed that there was effectively a kind of arms race between the parties going on, where we're coming up with ideas, we're thinking about what should happen. And I was going out and I was talking to a lot of industry bodies and charities and things saying, do your thinking now, you shape your vision, because frankly, the mayor's going to arrive and they're going to be going, oh Lord, what am I going to do here? Dealing with the difficulties of the councils. We all need to be having this conversation about how things can be different. I mean, so I'm excited in the same way as Anna is, as the opportunity to have a deeper conversation within my own party about how we bring our values to life in a 2028 mayoralty. But I'm also, it may give more opportunity for the rest of civil society, to use a bit of jargon, to think about what the future looks like as well. And that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Perfect.
Yeah.
No, and we have run out of time, but thank you both ever so much for your time this evening. Particularly as this is pretty hot news, as you only found out yourselves a few days ago. So really appreciate you taking the time out to share with our viewers and listeners all the background to an intriguing twist and turn in politics. And I guess 2.5 years in the future, what is it they say? A week can be a long time in politics. So we will watch this with interest. So you've been listening to the Pompey Politics Podcast. I've been Ian Tiny Morris.
And our guests this evening have been Martin Todd and Anna Cllr.
And Anna Cllr.
And yes.
I did.
Say your own name.
And I've been Simon Sansbury. Thank you very much, everybody, for taking part and for those fantastic comments. I can see there have been some other comments coming in, but my apologies, we haven't had time to go through them all. Please do make sure to join us next week at 6:27 when it's the last show of the year, where we'll be taking a Yuletide look at the last Portsmouth Full Council meeting of the year, and seeing what actually gets what passed and what doesn't. But again, if you do want to make sure that you don't miss out on anything about our show and about local and national politics, then please do make sure to like, follow and subscribe. So we'll see you next week. Don't forget to like, follow and comment on Facebook, or comment and subscribe on YouTube. Find us on all the social media platforms: Facebook, X, YouTube, Threads, LinkedIn.